Can failure in farming really make it successful? I'm Natalie Forstbauer from Heart and Soil magazine, bringing you a conversation with George Young from Fobbing Farms. And he is going to bring us through the highs and lows of his farming journey as he moves from a conventional to an organic farm. He incorporates regenerative practices, agroecology, diversity in his mixed farm, which is about 1,200 acres in the southeast of England. Thanks for joining us for this episode of Heart and Soil. Enjoy the conversation.
Tell you, I don't know how I first came across your account. It was first on Twitter though, and I love the way you share your content, and I love the message that you're sharing. And I think it was maybe a year or so ago that I first came across your stuff, and I was like, oh, if I ever do a magazine on organic farming, I've got to make sure to connect with him. So I appreciate your time today.
No, of course.
Mm-hmm. You probably already know this. One of the things that makes you so relatable is that you have this conventional farming background, and you're transitioning and have transitioned to a lot of organic and regenerative practices. So
the thing I keep on saying is, anytime I do any talks or anything, because it's so easy, if you're not careful, you give a talk and everything sounds like it's just gone absolutely perfectly, because you just talk about all the good stuff that's happened. So I'm making sure now, I'm like, this is all the stuff that's gone really wrong along the way. It's like knocked me sideways. But 8 years ago, I was working in London, and had I continued to do that, I most definitely would be vegetarian now. I would quite possibly be vegan, and I would be drinking Bill Gates Kool-Aid and Lewis Hamilton, and all these other people who know nothing about what they're talking about going into that space. I know I'd be on there, and it's only because of what I've learned over the past 8 years that I realize how wrong that is. But given the fact that
go ahead.
Well, just given the fact that I would have been someone thinking that was the right way to go, because they're these powerful people who you think know well, they are one of the biggest issues. And again, it's a really interesting one. Do you fix these problems with capitalism, or do you try and break capitalism? Because ultimately it all comes down to capitalism. What Bill Gates is doing is a capitalist version of it, and he's attempting to try to use capitalism to break it. Well, ultimately I think we both need to attempt to use capitalism to fix the world, and also try and break capitalism at the same time. Then we might be getting, but I mean, yeah,
George, tell me more about that. Tell me more about that when you say you'd be drinking his Kool-Aid, and why that would be, and what you've learned that has changed the way that you are living today.
So I think that a lot of these people, and a lot of the messages that they purvey are really kind of one-dimensional. So and so much of it comes down to environment. And I suppose what I've learned since I've been back on the farm is that environment, if you're looking at the environment, you're looking at the wrong thing. That's not across the board the case. Obviously, like big fossil fuel burning industries, ones that produce a huge amount of genuine methane from what they do. I'm not talking about them. They need to sort their shit out. But certainly when it comes to a lot of other industries, and most definitely farming, you can't look at it in a one-dimensional term. So yeah, for me, it all comes down to ecology, which naturally starts with the soil. And you can like, and again, like there are such simplistic ways to know. It's funny how science is trying to wangle its way in every single thing at the moment. And in the UK, I don't know what it's like in the US, but like in the UK, farmers' knowledge is being completely ignored in favor of scientists' knowledge. But scientists come in and they might be playing with 1, 2, 3 variables, not the hundreds that farmers are playing with. And it's kind of interesting because the stuff that I'm talking about often gets ignored. And in fact, there's nothing wrong if you're an experienced farmer with picking up the soil with your hands, smelling it, looking at it. You know whether or not your soil is working. You said it, like, whether or not you've got enough in there or not. And from that basis, you don't need to go and do an organic matter analysis and a something else and something else and something else, you know whether or not it's good or not. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of that simplicity, and actually just looking at it and saying, is my farm functioning well ecologically? And I'd argue that hardly anyone's farm, if anyone's in the UK's, is. And I'm trying to develop mine to a situation where it is. And I think if everyone were to do that, and do that all around the world, and look to, I'm taking part in a gene editing and genetic modification seminar next Sunday about this. And people are thinking, oh, we need to develop crops that grow in drought areas. It's like, that's such a retarded one-dimensional scientific view on how you fix that. Whereas instead, you see these people in desert situations. I've seen like mangrove reintroductions. In deserts, they do things where they're able to create oases. And if you do that enough, you change your hydrological cycle and start producing rain, because your whole, like, everything works differently. Then you don't need all these weird gene editing. You just do it based on sensible principles. And instead, everything's the simple, like the kind of quick scientific option. And this is where capitalism comes in, because, you know, governments love it, because why wouldn't they invest in science? It looks scientific and like your high tech and all those kind of good buzzy words, and it's all based on education. And everyone thinks it's great that everyone's getting educated really, really well. And it means there's loads of jobs, loads of economy, and they can pump loads of money into it. And it goes all around the world, and it's economically savvy, which is where capitalism is buggering everything up.
Right. So what inspired you, George, to farm regeneratively and organically?
It's kind of been a bit of a slow, well, it was a slow burn at the beginning. So when I came home, we were very conventional. We kind of min-tilled some stuff, but we ploughed a lot of the time. So we probably ploughed 50% of the farm every year, growing just 3 crops. And I think, so I came back in May, and we harvest in late July, or well, mid to late July and August most of the time. And so essentially every year at that point, we would go from having a farm that had 100% cover to a farm that had probably about 3% cover in hedgerows and things like that, over the course of sort of 3 to 4 weeks. And I remember that being quite a stark thing in my first year back, like just witnessing, you know, for a start, we didn't have particularly good, well, we still don't have particularly good hedgerows. These are some of the things I'm trying to get better. But yeah, so that was like this original really stark thought of like, this doesn't feel quite right. There's, you know, it's a very kind of grabby way of managing farmland. And then I met another farmer I was introduced to who did zero till, and there were lots of nice benefits to that. And it began me thinking about the soil, began just, yeah, those sorts of things began me thinking about. And then that was when it then began to really snowball. And, you know, we zero tilled here, and I started witnessing the really, really simple, lovely little stuff, like by doing, and you know, I'm now converting from zero till to organic. So I am going to be doing some level of cultivation again and things like that. But the thing that really got me in no-till is that the fact you have little mouse holes in the middle of the field, whereas normally you'd be cultivating that every year. And actually, no, we've got stuff living in the middle of the field. So you start feeling like things are going well, and then you'd notice an increase in the number of small mammals. And you know, if you've got more small mammals, you know your soil's working. You don't need to go and do a soil test. If you've got a load more new mammals and diversity of mammals, your soil's doing well, because all the food web below that has to be doing well for those mammals to be present. So it's like, you know, look at the obvious things. You don't necessarily need to go and, again, this thing about observation, not necessarily scientific testing.
I love that. I love that you name observation, because I think that's such a key in learning what is happening in your fields and what is happening with your plants. Yeah. And that's a conversation I recently had with my dad. He's like, just watch, because I'm on a new farm myself. And he's like, just watch the plants. They'll tell you, yeah. Watch the soil, they'll tell you. It's like, okay, I can do that.
I have a thing where I like to kind of, it's a lot easier now when we've got the cows, but just to go and be part of your farm. And there's an interesting thing that Dad's kind of realized. So with these cows now, We've got herbal lays, so these really lovely diverse lays that are in our arable rotation. So land that has never been grazed in all the time that we've been here, which is 60 odd years at this farm. Dad's never seen livestock on these fields. And so now we're like, we're sticking fencing up, temporary electric fences up on it. We're walking all over it. We're going and seeing the cows. And he said, he's never seen the farm this way. He's never actually really been, you see every bit, every meter of land you have laid eyes on, not sitting on a boom sprayer, going over the top or seed drilling or anything like that. Like you are looking at it on foot, going, seeing the animals, going, it's weird. And you don't necessarily, so one of the things I haven't particularly seen, because I haven't really seen much ploughing on the farm because we migrated to zero till so quickly when I came back. I've not seen that, you see a lot of differences in soil type when you plough, obviously. So I've not witnessed that, which Dad knows very well. But you see it a lot when you walk out with the cows now. So you do get a much better kind of anchoring to your farm and understanding of your farm, because you are farming it on foot and being part of it, rather than, a little bit like what's wrong with humanity, that they're living on top of the world rather than part of it. Farming in the way that I'm now farming now, you're farming as part of the farm, not just doing what you like on top of it.
That connection is so powerful, George, that you're naming and bringing us to. And I think that it goes even further than that in terms of like our disconnect that we have had globally around where our food comes from, and the disconnect that you named for the farmers that has happened unconsciously.
Yep.
And the reconnection that happens when we are going deeper and listening to the land and listening to the plants and listening to the whole ecosystem of the farm. That's really powerful. What have been some of your biggest hurdles in doing this transition?
To be honest, I am getting more and more concerned about cash flow.
Okay.
So there are a ton of farmers globally doing this stuff, and a few of them are outspoken. Gabe Brown, obviously nicely outspoken, but on the whole, most of them are very, very quiet, and they just want to get on with what they're doing on their farm, and no one knows about them, or very few people know about them. And so, given the fact that I'm on such a degraded farm, and I'm in an area of the UK which is basically the wheat belt of the UK. I know it's still tiny.
What part of the UK is that?
So it's the wheat belt of the UK is or the breadbasket is basically East Anglia. So the bit kind of to the east and slightly north, or to the east of London and slightly north to the east of London, that sort of area. So very, very few people have cattle. There's basically no mixed farming. The people who do have cattle tend to just have cattle on their cattle land and do farming on their arable farming on their other land. Where was I going with this? What was the point?
What your biggest hurdle?
Yeah, biggest hurdle, exactly. So because of this, I'm really trying hard to implement, like, rather than doing one project over 3 or 4 years, I am doing between 2 and 4 projects a year. So this is becoming quite difficult now because they're not little projects. So, I'm not even counting the cows this year as a project. That's just, whereas in fact, they've been a huge time suck. But like this year, it's the flour mill, plus the rest of the processing equipment and cleaning equipment, which again, most people would consider that a project over multiple years. Plus the dairy I'm working on, so going back into dairy, which we've not done for 65 years. So basically all my dad's life. And working on a bakery project as well, because none of this works unless we've got the food market. And so this is when I talk about cash flow, this is exactly what I'm meaning, that none of what I'm trying to do works within the current system of food. And so that system of food needs changing. And I feel that these things need to be happening so fast. And I am one of the few people who's happy to be outspoken and consequently happy to take the flack that comes with that, because there is a hell of a lot, I'll tell you that. That it's like, yeah, the hardest thing for me is just making sure I'm pushing all of these projects at the same time.
So what I'm hearing, George, is you're not just focusing on building the health of the soil and the health of the land, but you're building the health of your whole entire operation and taking it from soil to people's tables and to people's homes. So you're growing it, you're producing it, you're cleaning it, you're and finishing it and packaging it and bringing it to the customer. So you're doing soil to the table, literally, and yes, you're in the growing stages.
So only for me, regen ag or agroecology, whatever you want to call it, only works when that human side functions really well, and when there's genuine, like when people really actually care about the food that they're putting in their tummies. So this is all about. So a lot of the things that get thrown at me are questions about affordability. Mm-hmm. And affordability is the wrong word. There are two words that most people think mean the same thing, and they mean entirely different things: affordability and value. And very simply, if someone values something, they will pay for it. And in today's really peculiar consumerist world, people value televisions and mobile phones and cars above the food that they eat. It's not enough. There's very few people can't afford expensive food. They choose not to because they value that other consumerist stuff over and above food. Now, there are obviously some people who cannot afford it. That's fair enough. But I'm kind of tackling this in two ways, and this is why I'm starting the bakery. So out of interest, how much does a loaf of bread cost for you guys? If you would go out in the supermarket and spend.
Well, I'm in Canada, and I'm in rural Canada in Saskatchewan, and I mostly bake my own bread, George, but I think it's a couple dollars. Like, I don't think you can get one for less than a couple dollars. Okay. $2, $3, I think $3. Okay. Maybe you can buy it on sale for less, but I'm pretty sure it's around $3.
Okay, so that's not actually dissimilar in price. Okay, that's about, well, would that be the cheapo one?
Yeah, that would be the cheaper ones. Yeah.
Okay. Well, mate, that is more expensive. See, in the UK, like we're really, so yeah, in the UK, we're probably about 2/3 the price for the cheap stuff. So okay, we've got really low prices. And so one of the things that I'm trying to do is by essentially doing vertical integration. So by growing the crop, milling it myself, and then baking it, there's obviously, you're not paying for logistics. The secondary products from the milling and the cleaning can stay on the farm and be very beneficial there. So what I'm essentially trying to do is create a loaf of bread from my farm that is, have you heard of WSU, Washington State University Bread Lab? Steve Jones? Okay, so
I don't know that I have.
Steve Jones is a pretty incredible wheat breeder at Washington State University. He's developed something called the approachable loaf, which is essentially a naturally leavened loaf, which looks like a normal sliced white or wholemeal loaf. But it looks like a sandwich loaf. So it's a tin loaf, it's pre-sliced. It's what most people want. Now, the funny thing is, you know, I live like Essex, where I am, is essentially the outskirts of London. And so people, they either want sourdough, but sourdough doesn't fit in the toaster because it's free form and it's, you know, funny shapes and all this kind of stuff. So most people don't want that. They want to be able to put toast in the toaster or bread in the toaster and know that it fits that shape, or they want to be able to make a sandwich. So I'm actually looking to benchmark my entire bakery around an approachable loaf at enough of a scale, which means that I can pay myself. So for context, wheat at the moment is £200 a ton, and that's wheat that's had loads and loads of inputs, you know, conventional wheat. And organic wheat, I think, is about 350, 380 a ton, somewhere around there. I'm looking at paying the farm £600 a ton and these will be for heritage wheat crops. And this is quite important. This is pre kind of modern wheat breeding. So pre the 1930s, when they started really messing up like gluten strand length in the wheat and all these kind of things. So varieties before that, when they were genuinely naturally bred, and so paying £600 a ton there, £400 for the mill. So basically £1 a kilo into the bakery, which means that every business along the way has made money. And then making sure that the bakery earns 20% on everything. So 20% on every input. And I'm working out now, so obviously this big equation as to the more loaves you've got to create, the more infrastructure cost, but it's just to get that price for me down to £2 a loaf, whereby kind of people are, so it's still going to be on the higher end of a conventional loaf, but it'll be price comparable to that. And I might even be able to pull that price down a bit more if I can.
Right. So it will be priced competitively. And so, George, like I have so much deep appreciation for the scope and the vision that you have for what I might name as holistic regenerative agroecology, organic farming, which is like soil to table. And so that can be in lots of different ways, right? Or would you agree that it could be farm to farmer's market, or farm to restaurant, or farm to, like you said, making bread? Is that kind of the model that you're talking about? Or
yeah, essentially, yeah. Some of it comes down to the fact I want to also be in a situation whereby once I can start demonstrating markets, that's when I can then begin to persuade local farmers to grow the way I want them to grow for me. And then it's that way, like how do you actually create large scale change to regenerative practices? And you only do that by creating that market and growing that market and then making people change on their farm.
So do you see yourself eventually mentoring and incorporating and inviting other farmers to grow for you then, and then mill it and bake it and bring it to the consumer? Yeah, so it's really then.
Yeah, I essentially it's about trying to, so one of the big things is trying to create a food hub, or not even necessarily just food, but a food hub here on the farm. And then also that model to be able to be rolled out to other, and so my food hub might cover sort of a 10-mile radius, for instance. And then someone else can have a food hub, someone else can have a food hub. And it's the ability, and essentially, so the French kind of nailed this with their co-op systems. We just don't have that in the UK. And it's stupid. And, essentially that's almost the sort of model that I want to try and create. The problem is that, especially in my area, farmers love their equipment. They love big machines. They like going shooting in the winter. They don't want livestock. So how do you begin to make that change?
And so how do you begin to make that change?
I think, I really think it is about, once you've got that market, and you see, the thing is, my method of farming isn't necessarily that difficult. Because what I'm suggesting is, my food doesn't need to be organic. It just needs to be grown without pesticides and fertilizer. So I'm not necessarily bothered if that field grew a non-organic crop the previous year. Somewhat dependent on what they put on, but on the whole, it's not a massive issue. So if it's grown without inputs, that's fine. So in which case, you can say to local farmers, grow me this crop of wheat. Here's the seed. I will buy it back from you for £600 a ton. Just leave the field. You don't have to do anything. You can just leave the field alone. And then it's also trying to build out relationships with grazers and people like that to say, right, well, I want these guys to begin to grow organically. So it's a way of persuading them to put grass lays or herbal lays into their rotation, which are then to ensure there's a market for meat grown in that way, such that those farmers who don't want to be livestock farmers don't have to worry about the livestock because someone else is running livestock on their farm. Yes. Improving their ecology and in my opinion, that's the only way we're going to start making these changes. It cannot be top down. It has to be bottom up.
I love that. I love that. And I love the way you're modeling that and all the questions you're asking. It's really powerful. What's your best piece of farming advice?
probably like, so loads of farmers tend to be quite what's the word, for some reason the word pessimistic is in my head and that's entirely the wrong word. Not unadventurous. There we go. Unadventurous. Most farmers tend to be quite unadventurous, and so when it comes to market, which I'm trying to create markets, and most farmers won't even look to try something unless there's a market there. They won't. They're very antsy about stepping out of their comfort zone. That's the kind of what I tend to see across the board in farming. If you were to make a generalization, I know loads of people who are not like that, but if you're making a generalization, that would be it. And I think stepping out of your comfort zone as a farmer is a fantastic thing to do. And I'm for some reason a lot less risk averse than most people, so I tend to do it quite bombastically, to the extent that I have a feeling that most people seem to think I have no financial encumbrances, which is not the case. But certainly on a small scale, it's possible for any farmer to try stuff. And I think if you're not trying stuff every year as a farmer, it's got to be a bit boring. But like it's amazing how much you learn by trying things. And obviously, like this is the case. It's everyone knows that if you try something and it fails, you still learn tons. And case in point for my cows this year, we've had so many problems with them from things we just didn't know about, and now we know a huge amount more, and we can push forward. Now, essentially, you just have to really go for it and try these things. And it doesn't matter if you make mistakes, just learn from them and keep pushing. But I don't know, that's a crap piece of advice, isn't it?
I think it's great advice, because I think that's true, not just for farmers, but I think it's true for humanity right now, is we've gotten really comfortable living the way we're living. And now the earth is speaking back to us, right? The earth is like literally slapped us and literally stunned us with a pandemic, for example. And it's making people stop, pause, and think. I mean, with fire safety, when they were taught to stop, drop, and roll, and now with like global health, we're being invited to stop, pause, and think and take actions in new ways. So I think what you named is so brilliant, that not just farmers need to get out, move out of their comfort zone, but humanity, we need to move out of our comfort zone and ask about how we're living, about how we're consuming food, about where it's coming from, and what role we're playing, not just in our, in our own homes, but also with our neighbors and within our community and within the global reach that we do have, and conversations. So
yeah, I think the community aspect is the most fascinating one to me, because it is so important, and I don't think most people know about it. And I think people are getting worse and worse with their community spirit and things like that. It is what humanity is about. Like I kind of look at it. So humans need three things to survive. They need food and water, they need clothing, and they need shelter. Now, amusingly, none of those things are taught at school, or barely taught at school. Certainly in the UK, they're not on the curriculum at all. But they need, surviving is not living, really, to thrive, we need a fourth thing, which is essentially is culture. It's the arts. It's what community is based upon. And one of the funny things about COVID, in terms of a negative step back from this, is that there's one art form which I think is at risk of no longer being an art. And that is movies and television shows. Now, movies, I could just about consider being an art form before, because you used to go to the cinema to watch them, and you watched them in an audience, and you had that community feeling whilst doing it. Now everyone just stays at home and watches Netflix or Amazon. You've lost that community spirit there. No, the true arts are theatre, comedy, poetry. Like I used to find it so awkward when I'd go to these hippie-ish events that I go to, and they'd read a poem at the beginning or at the end, or there'd be some folk singing. And actually now I'm like, no, this is brilliant. I still feel a bit awkward because I wasn't brought up like it. But actually that's fantastic. Like everyone's there in the moment. And this kind of sedentary thing of getting in the evening, turning the television on, and having content beamed into your eyes. And this, again, like at least if you went to the cinema, it was a reflective image. The whole way that our world works is from light reflection, right? And then instead we spend a huge amount of time in front of screens, which is light kind of just being pummeled into our eyes. No wonder it's so addictive. So everything has gone wrong on that stretch, and we need to find community through culture again, I think.
Right. I totally agree. And I really see it, one of the vehicles being through food and through the way we eat and the way we farm and the way we connect through that, because it's one of the only ways that we can connect, given the way that we're all being told to live and show up right now.
Well, one of the slightly fun things that I begin to think now is farms are not just there for environment, ecology, and food and fiber production. They can be so much more. And so I question myself now, and I say to myself, well, what can my farm be? And some of this then came about. There's a friend of mine, Ben, who does podcasts and things like that, who farms sort of 40, 50 miles away from me. And I went and saw him, and he's similarly sort of a bit off the wall like me and likes trying stuff, and and he said, oh, I'm looking into building an amphitheater for doing comedy on my farm. And that was like, literally, I was at peak ideas at that time. The last thing I needed was more ideas. And I drove home and I couldn't think of anything apart from this. And then like the next day I walked around my farm and started thinking about, actually, how can you build that community so it doesn't just kind of watch your farm? How can you build that community into your farm? So they're there, they're going to come and watch theatre and amateur dramatics and like all that kind of stuff. And what can farms be? That's not. There's so much more than just eating nutritious food.
That's right.
Creating a place where bugs and birds like hanging out.
Yes, so true, so true. Well, I just adore you, George. I really do, and I am so excited that I've had the opportunity to have this conversation with you, and I look forward to having more conversations with you and sharing your wisdom.
I don't think it's wisdom. It's just mania or something. But
Yeah, well, you're so humble. Okay, I look forward to sharing your experiences, then your life experience with our community.
But no, it's great.